Hello and welcome to Rick's RC Flying Channel. In this video, we're going to take a look on how to apply fiberglass cloth onto a wood surface. Now, in this particular case, we are fiberglassing the fuselage. Now, the sides have been fiberglassed already, and the bottom. The entire tail section, top and bottom, everything has been fiberglassed. Also, all the flight controls are fiberglassed, and what I've been using for the entire process is 3/4 ounce cloth with a very fine weave. And one nice thing about using 3/4 ounce, it gives you plenty of strength to make it dent resistance, and doesn't require as much epoxy resin. And one nice thing about if you fiberglass the wood surfaces, it seals the wood perfectly, and incredible fuel proof resistance. And the other thing is it creates a really good starting point for the finishing process. It's so smooth. I haven't even sanded it yet. I normally will start off with 400 grit sandpaper, and we'll see that when the next video comes out on the actual finishing process. What we're going to take a look at is how I apply the fiberglass cloth. Now, we're going to be using an epoxy resin. I use West System, and this one is the 105 series, and it's an epoxy resin. Now, like all epoxies, there's two parts to it. So you have various time limits, and I'm going to be using the West System 206, which is the slow hardener. And basically what that translates into is it gives you a pot working time of about 25 minutes to a half hour, depending on your shop temperature. The working time is about 90 minutes on the average, and the curing time about 10 to 15 hours. And again, it varies on the ambient temperature. So it is important to start off by being as organized as you can, because once the process begins, you don't want any interruptions. We're going to need a roll of toilet paper, obviously something to mix it in, have the epoxy resin, and we're going to apply it with a disposable brush. So I'm going to mix the epoxy up, and we'll begin the application. Now, as you go about to mixing the epoxy resin, without the mini pumps, you're looking at a ratio of 5 parts of 105 to 1 part of 206, the hardener. By the way, they make other types of hardeners depending on your requirement. They make a fast and a few other ones that you'll be able to check out on their website. Now, I'm using, of course, the slow one because I need time to do this job. Now, West System sells these mini pump systems, which makes it very simple. It's basically one stroke of this pump to one stroke of that pump. So you don't have to worry about trying to work out the 5-to-1 ratio. And so once you get that into your pot, mix it thoroughly, a minimum of 1 minute. A little bit longer would even be better. And I've already mixed it. And I'm going to start at this end here, because it's much easier to work back here, and whatever excess I have, I'll be able to trim away. It'll be difficult if I have too much excess here to trim it under that area. So you got to kind of plan it. The other thing is, as the cloth gets saturated with the fiberglass resin, the epoxy resin, it does stretch. You'll be able to manipulate it to get all the wrinkles out. And that's basically what we're going to attempt to do. I've got wax paper all below to protect my work surface. Now, when you apply it, you don't brush it on like if you were painting, okay? So you basically are going to dab it. We want it to soak through. And you just kind of try to keep as many of the wrinkles out, so you very gently pull it away. So you're not going to get much, like a painting action. We're just basically, what we're doing is soaking the fiberglass cloth. So I'm basically just dabbing the brush down at this point. Okay, so we want it really a good wet look, glossy wet look. Don't worry about putting too much on because we're going to remove most of the resin. But what's happening now, it's soaking right through the fiberglass cloth and soaking well into the wood. And that's what we want. So it's not a question of, painting it on. You're using the brush just simply to apply the resin. And when you dab it down, particularly once you start to get a fair amount of section covered, it's easier to pull the fabric. If you start that too early, you'll actually pull it away from whatever edge you started from. And it's a good idea to have the brush go in the direction that you want to end up in. Don't go this way, in other words. We're really working at getting any bubbles or wrinkles. We really want to get those out. We don't want, to have bubbles harden. I mean, if it does happen, we can deal with it. But ideally, you want it as smooth and flat as possible. You don't want to see any white spots. You want a real glossy, wet look. You'll actually see areas you can tell it's really soaked into the wood. So and those areas will be recognized because instead of that glossy look, it'll have little patches of a satin look to it. And then you can just go add a little more resin. Now, if you do see what looks like a little bubble or something and you can't eliminate it with the action of the brush, don't worry about it. When we start working with the tissue paper, the bathroom tissue paper, we'll be able to eliminate those. We don't have to do the back here because that's an instrument panel is going to be installed. So I still got plenty left, so I'm going to continue with the top surface. And as I'm stroking it with the brush, it's actually, I'm just allowing the weight of the brush. I'm not putting any downward force on it. It's literally just lightly dragging it over. Because if you apply any more pressure, you're going to pull the fiberglass cloth. And particularly here, I don't want it to leave this bulkhead that's up front here. So that's really well soaked. And we want to make sure the edge is well attached. Okay, so I used about, to do this area here and that, I used 3 pumps. And I actually still have probably enough to do like a vertical stab. Anyways, now the next step is we take this paper and we going to lay it over. Now, I like using, the toilet paper. One, it's really cheap and it does a really good job. And you go through quite a bit depending on the size of the airplane. Now you can see here how it's soaking up the epoxy resin, because we don't want epoxy resin on top of the fiberglass cloth. We just want the fiberglass cloth to be filled with the epoxy and, of course, whatever the wood absorbed. When you pull it off at a 45-degree angle. If for some reason you happen to pick up the fiberglass cloth, it's not the end of the world. You can tack it down again.
Just exactly how many times you'll have to apply the tissue paper, that varies between models and how much epoxy is on top of the fiberglass. I mean, basically, you're just going to keep repeating the process until you end up with a flat satin look. And, once you achieve that status, then you're in pretty good shape. Also, you'll get to a point where the tissue paper is not absorbing any more epoxy.
So it's a good idea just to pat it down to try to soak up as much as you can. You'll notice as we do this, it's getting a very satin look. We're basically going from that glossy look to a flat satin look. And as you get that look, you're doing a good job in removing the epoxy. It really doesn't matter which way you apply the paper, whatever your preference is. You can see it's still soaking up quite a bit. You can tell by the wet soaking through on the paper. So I'm hoping this will be the last application of the paper. It has a very flat satin look to it now. Now there's a few little, they look like bubbles. So we're going to eliminate those. And I'll show you how we do that. And we just keep applying it. And I'm hoping this will be the last application. and has a real flat look already to it, so I think we're going to be in good shape here. And you can tell it's paper is not absorbing really much more, so we've accomplished what we wanted. And now what we're going to do is check for any bubbles that we might have, and they're usually fairly easy to spot. So now what we do is we just take a bunch, and we're looking for potentially any wet areas or any bubbles. There's one here. So you just literally put pressure on it. That's actually looking really good. So if you ever were to see a glossy, shiny look in an area, just blotch it with some paper like this. We're looking real good. There's no bubbles, no wrinkles. Everything's looking good. So now we're just going to let this cure overnight, and then tomorrow we'll just trim away all the excess fiberglass. So the epoxy resin has cured overnight. It's turned out really nice. We have no wrinkles or bubbles. Turned out really smooth, and actually all the sides ended up really nice on this project. And like I mentioned before, boy, it sure adds a lot of strength. You know, this is just 1/8 inch balsa, and you hardly can put any pressure bending it. And as I said, it really prepares the fuselage for the finishing stages to get a nice sealed finish. Now we're going to trim this fabric, and sometimes I've had modelers say, geez, it's really hard to kind of get it started. If you ever have that situation, I find what works really well, particularly when you want to get to the ends, is work from the center outwards. So in other words, I can just pick a spot like here and go this way, okay? So, because just depending the way the resin has run down the edge, see, right now it's a little hard to get it started. So just go somewhere in the middle there, and then just pull a little tension on it, and away you go. Very easy. So again, if I want to start here, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to just start off somewhere here in the middle and work out. There we go. And I already trimmed the other side. And anything that's residual here, we're just simply going to sand that away. 3/4 ounce in particular with resin sands very nicely. And the West System epoxy in itself is a nice product to sand. So anyways, that's all going to be get like a final sanding and prepping. And the next stage then will be to prime it. And even though, I've carefully sanded and, looked for any irregularities in the finish, ultimately, after it's primed, that's when is your first telltale on what the finish may look like. So anything that doesn't seem quite right in terms of finishing will show up after you prime it. And that's a good time then to address those things, and then you can just reprime, and then from then on move on with the final finishing. Now, when it comes to epoxy resins, there are other products out there. Most of them work equally as well. I just happen to be using the West system. And whatever epoxy resin you use the same technique applying the fiberglass cloth. Anyways, if you have any questions or comments, as always, I appreciate it. And if you like the video, please select like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.